You're listening to Witch Wednesdays, your weekly podcast source for all things witchcraft in the modern world. Welcome back to Witch Wednesdays. I'm Steph, and you are listening to Household Spirits and Hearth Witchcraft. So Hearth Witchcraft is just something I'm going to touch on in the very beginning here, but most of this episode is going to be dedicated to household spirits, household fae, because I got quite a few questions, but then also specifically over on the Discord server, somebody asked me about my brownie that I have in my house, and that led to a lot of people having questions about that. So we are just covering household spirits in this episode. And I feel like looking at the list that I have in front of me to talk about household spirits, that this is going to be a long one. So if you are not interested in household fae, this might not be the episode for you, because I think that I have a lot of different ones to mention, because I'm going to try to mention all of the different ones across the various traditions that I know of. So might get a little bit long. All right. Hearth witchcraft is something I wanted to touch on first because they kind of go together, household fae and the idea of hearth witchcraft and being a hearth witch. And the hearth is where the fire burned for our ancestors. So it is usually the center location of the house where they made food and warmed themselves in the winter months. Nowadays, we do not have that central hearth location. A lot of homes have fireplaces, a lot of homes have ovens and stoves, but very few have that centrally located hearth that everyone sort of eats around, sleeps around. It is just not the priority that it used to be. But we still use the term hearth witch and hearth witchcraft as a term for someone whose witchcraft is focused mainly on the home and daily life. So that could also be called a house witch or a cottage witch. It really depends on what terminology you like best. And the hearth witch typically possesses a wide range of domestic skills that she makes magical. So it's crafty, resourceful, turning scraps of fabric into spell poppets and having kitchen witchery in there with that. Hearth witches are also often associated with the idea of coziness and comfort. So lots of, bookshelves and journaling and pillows and blankets everywhere. Everything homey and, food smells, coffee smells, lots of crystals and stuff around for protection and for grounding. Every sort of aspect of a hearth witch's practice is really focused on the home with traditional items that you find around the home and for the people that reside in it. I think all of us do some aspects of hearth witchcraft, incorporate some of those things in there, but for the hearth witch in particular, it really is like their sole focus and the main aspect of their witchcraft. So I just wanted to throw that out there to sort of give a definition of hearth in general before we get into the idea of spirits and spirits of the home, because not every hearth witch has a household spirit, but a lot of them do believe in something on this list. So all that said, we are going to get into the various ideas of house spirit, household guardians. But first, I'm going to talk about caring for the spirit of your house in general. So I am not talking about a specific hearth god or goddess. I am not talking about any brownies or fae that are in your house. I am talking about the house itself, the bones of the house itself, because this is super important and often neglected, because your house itself is the physical structure that shields you from the outside, whether that is from the weather, whether that's from other people. It is a sanctuary for you and your family. So it's very important to show it some love, whether you consider yourself a hearth witch or not. So I wanted to just talk about how to do that and how to honor the spirit of your home. And the easiest, most straightforward way is to just talk to it, recognize that your house has its own energy and spirit, and show it some gratitude just by talking to it, acknowledging it, telling it that you appreciate it, letting it know if you're making, renovations or changes, just thanking it for doing its job. If you ever watch the Marie Kondo series on Netflix where she has a bunch of different, I think there's like 8 episodes of 8 different families that she goes into their house. The very first thing that she does is sit in the center of the home and get to know the house spirit and thank the house spirit and show it gratitude before even beginning the process. So that is a very important step to take. Another way to honor your house spirit is to give it a name. In older days, every single house had a name just like a person. So if you travel to any, historical parts of the United States, and I'm sure in other countries too, all older homes have a name. Oak Manor or Bramble Estate, there's all these different names that they have. It's an ancient tradition that was passed down through the generations. And until, recent years, all houses used to have a name. So that's a great tradition to continue if your house doesn't have one. And you don't have to name it anything fancy. It could just be like your last name plus manor or plus estate. So Johnson Estate, Johnson Manor. It does not have to be anything difficult, but you can if you want to. You can get really creative with it. You can look at what plants and things are on your property, or look up what historically it used to be at your property where your house was built and figure out a name that way. But giving it a name is something very tangible that we can talk to it and to treat it with respect. The last thing I wanted to mention is offerings for the spirit of the house. We're going to get into offerings for the fae, of course, but you can just offer something to the spirit of your home in general. And I found that this is very important before you're going to begin renovations on your home. Ask me how I know. So there are a lot of stories about ghosts and things being stirred up when renovations start because you are disturbing them. And I think along with hearth spirits, I'm going to get into an episode maybe next month or the month after about hauntings, people who think they're haunted and think their house is haunted. And that's going to come up in the hauntings episode of when you have been in your house and everything's fine and then all of a sudden you feel like it's haunted. If you start renovations, you tend to stir up ghosts or just angering the spirit of the house by not letting them know the renovations are coming. So if you are doing renovations and you want the spirit of your home to not feel neglected, giving an offering can be a great idea. And that can be anything: water, alcohol, leaving out milk or sweets or a portion of your dinner. Whatever it is, just state that it's an offering for your home and the idea that the renovation is coming up, and your home will know what that is for. So I think it's just a nice thing to be able to recognize and appreciate the spirit of your home. And that is something that I changed in my own personal life and my own personal practice because I did not like this home. When we moved in, my husband fell in love with it. He found it because we were searching for homes, and I saw maybe like 3 and I was like, I'm done, because I just did not care as much as he did. And he was so nitpicky about stuff. I was like, I'm not coming with you to look at any of their houses. You pick one and that's it. I'm not coming to see it. So I moved in like sight unseen. Like I saw like the listing pictures of it, but I never came and saw it before we bought it because I was just too frustrated with the home hunting process. Like sending good vibes to anybody who's doing that because I thought it was awful. I lasted 3 houses and he saw 50. I don't know how he did it. But anyway, settled on this one, and he absolutely loves it here. And he did from the beginning and always had a deep bond with this house. And I never did, because when we first moved in, it was my first moving into a house. So I had always had an apartment and a landlord and somebody to fix problems. So when we moved into this house and I suddenly had to fix problems, it was like a whole new world for me, and I hated every minute of it. So of course, when you move into someplace new, there's always things to be updated and fixed. And then of course, as time goes on, things break and you have to like keep fixing and updating stuff. And as somebody who has rented an apartment for the last 10 years, I was not prepared for that. So I was really angry and not loving this house when we first moved in. It was like too much stress, too much work. So I really had to change my attitude and be like, okay, wait a minute. I need to like get myself on good terms with the spirit of this house and thank this house for everything that it is providing. And then maybe things will stop going wrong. So highly recommend doing that. So other than the spirit of the house, that we are going to get into household deities, household spirits, and fae. So now that I can see that this episode is already, 8 minutes long, this is definitely going to be a long one. So I hope you have your coffee and are going to get settled in. First up, household deities. It has been a common belief in paganism as well as folklore across many parts of the world that a household deity is a deity or spirit that protects the home, looking after the entire household or certain key members. Our ancient ancestors believed that spirits and gods resided in their homes, and this belief was particularly strong when it came to the hearth. Household deities tend to fit into two types. Firstly, a specific deity, usually a goddess, often referred to as a hearth goddess or domestic goddess, who is associated with home and hearth. And the second type of household deities are those that are not one singular deity, but a type or species of an animistic deity who usually has lesser powers than those major hearth gods and goddesses. So this type was common in a lot of older religions. They were known as the Lares in ancient Rome, the Gashin in Korean shamanism, Kofgodas in Anglo-Saxon paganism, and some of these survived Christianization as fairy-like creatures in folklore and turned into what we know as the brownie or the Slavic domovoi. Household deities were usually worshipped not in temples, but directly in the home, where they were represented by small idols, amulets, paintings, and the more prosperous households might even have a small shrine to the household gods. The gods would be treated as members of the family and invited in to join meals or be given their own offerings of food and drink. So let's start with gods, and specifically, let's go to Greek and Roman. There are a lot of crossover between Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. I think we all know that, including the kitchen and hearth. So there is Hestia and Vesta. These are the hearth goddesses. Hestia was ancient Greek hearth goddess, also goddess of family and state. She was the virgin daughter of Kronos and Rhea, and her name translates to hearth or altar, and therefore she was goddess of the hearth in every ancient Greek household. The Roman equivalent is Vesta. Juno was the guardian of home, marriage, and family. She was a protector of women and often had altars to her set up in the kitchen. And like I mentioned, the Lares were the home and kitchen guardian spirits. They were also called the night watchmen, and some believe that they were once ancestral spirits who protected their loved ones. The actual origin is unknown, but they were thought to be benevolent spirits of the home and hearth and dwelled under the hearth in the family's household and were often depicted in snake or lizard form. In the Celtic tradition, perhaps the most well-known, is Brigid, the triple goddess of fire, healing, and poetry. Because she was the goddess of the sacred flame, she is therefore associated with the hearth fire. There is also Cailleach. Cailleach was a goddess in Scotland in ancient times. She is the old woman of winter and is sometimes worshipped as a kitchen goddess because she watches over the dormant seeds through the winter months, therefore ensuring a bountiful harvest for the next growing season. And since we use the harvest in the kitchen, she is also worshipped as a kitchen goddess. She's generally depicted as a wise old woman. Sometimes she has a blue-green face and an apron. There is also Ceridwen, a Welsh hearth goddess and keeper of the cauldron. The cauldron was once located at the hearth and was a symbol of knowledge and transformation. And of course, one of the key elements of the hearth in the kitchen is transformation, because we take the food and transform it into something to feed ourselves and our families. In the Chinese tradition, there is Zhao Jun, also known as Zhao Shen, and Zhang Lang, or the Chinese kitchen god. He watches over the hearth and is also honored in Vietnam. He is one of the many hearth deities in Chinese folklore and Taoism. The Chinese kitchen god's job is to watch over all the goings-on in the home and report back to the Jade Emperor in heaven. A family would be rewarded or punished based on what Zhao Jun had seen in the previous lunar year. Today, many Chinese families hang pictures of Zhao Jun above their stoves and give various offerings to him throughout the year, and some even light firecrackers in his name. And not only do the Chinese honor the kitchen god, they also honor their ancestors at the hearth. Ancestors are built an altar in the household, which acts as a bridge between the ancestors and their descendants. And offerings of incense and food are often common, and they are honored by lighting a red candle on the stove. Bes is the Egyptian god of hearth and home. Bes is the dwarf-like protector of mothers and children, but was also guardian of musicians, dancers, and prostitutes. Bes was often tattooed on thighs of dancers and prostitutes. His image was placed over doorways and hearths to protect the household and its inhabitants from evil. So those are just a few of the most common, but again, most pantheons and traditions are going to have some sort of household deity, whether that is a smaller, sort of spirits like the Lares in ancient Rome, or whether that is a household hearth deity like Brigid. Most pantheons are going to have something that's associated with home, with mothers, with food, with sacred fire, something along those lines that you can find if you are looking to work specifically with a hearth deity. All right, now we are into the idea of household fae and the questions that I was going to answer about my little brownie. Most of our ancestors believed that everything in nature had consciousness. So when trees were cut down and other things from nature were used to build a home, the fairies or spirits linked to those items were then brought into the home. And others believed that the fairies who were occupying that landscape where a home was being built became household spirits. So that's why there were a lot of superstitions about where a home was being built. For example, in Scandinavia, they would stay the night at the site of a new home to see if any evil spirits manifested. So if the person was able to sleep peacefully, then a home could be built there. And if not, they would find a new location. So there are different, methods for testing a suitable site that included, checking the ground, checking nearby trees, seeing if there was any sort of sign of a previous fire, because fire was a bad sign and associated with evil spirits. So a lot of people would refrain from building some place that had a fire. And if there were good fairies on the new home's site, the homeowners would petition the nature spirits to become their household gods. So that's where a lot of these, originated in the first place. But I am going to get into the list of the various options depending on what sort of tradition you follow. So let's start with the domovoi, and that is Slavic mythology. So originating in this Slavic mythology, a domovoi is a hairy little imp known as one of the world's creepier household gods. So as the legends go, each house has a personal domovoi, which usually resides somewhere beneath the threshold, like under the stove or in the oven. The creatures are sometimes thought to be the spirit of the original head of the household. Domovoi take the form of a tiny old man, about the size of a small child, with a long gray beard. Sometimes they will mirror aspects of a family ancestor, or even the current head of the household. And they can also take on animal form, appearing as a cat, dog, or snake. To keep the domovoi content, you must keep a tidy household. And you will see this as a running theme through all the other household spirits as well. The home needs to be kept in good condition. Clean your dishes, properly put them away. Don't leave food out unless it's an offering specifically for the domovoi. If they are happy, they might come out at night and perform small chores around the house and yard. But if they are upset with the condition of the house or their treatment, they will turn into pests and steal small items, break things, and disturb your sleep, among other nuisances. In Finnish mythology, there is a type of spirit known as the haltija, which acts as a protector of someone or something. And then among these spirits, specifically, the koti hattila looks after the home. So similar to other European household imps, it is a little elf figure that can either act as a helper or a trickster, depending on its temperament. And these house gnomes are said to live in the attic or even the barn, looking out for and protecting the family that lives there. And in Finnish folklore, they are closely related to the other haltija type spirits that protect different areas of the house rather than having one that protects the entire house. In Spanish folklore, it is the trasgu, and that originates in the northern regions of Spain. It's a goblin that has a strange love of domestic chores and also a tendency towards mischief. It is possibly related to the more violent redcap in European folklore, but it has more of an impish reputation and appears as a small, spindly little elf that wears a red cloak and red cap. They often have a limp and a hole in their left hand, and sometimes are described as having horns. The trasgus should be provided with small amounts of water and access to a warm place to sleep, such as near a chimney. If they are happy, they will perform small household chores, such as washing up, but if they are neglected, they will move and hide items around the house, break dishes, and generally make a mess. So in order to get rid of a trasgu, Legend says that you have to assign them an impossible task like picking up grains, which will fall through that hole in their hand. And eventually they will get discouraged and leave the house. In northern England, you have the hob. This is probably one of the most well-known types of household spirits because this is the spirit that inspired the Harry Potter character Dobby. According to the folklore, hobs are a more variable type of household spirit, and they can also inhabit shops and farms and help with the work there. So they are less closely associated with a specific house or family. Hobs look like stunted elves that mainly come out at night to help with chores, preferring not to be seen in their work. They are often a positive presence, but one thing they really hate is to be rewarded for their work. Traditionally, a hob will become offended and leave if the owner of the house tries to give them a piece of clothing, much like Dobby. But pretty much any praise can be seen as something that would get them to leave. So if you just leave them alone, let them do their work, everything should be fine. In Japanese folklore, there is the Zasiki Warashi. For the most part, they remain invisible or appear as a plump little child, but only to children. They will usually only show up to the adults or owners of a house if they are preparing to leave. So should they vacate the premises, it is a sure sign of impending doom and ruin. So these ones you do not want to leave. So it is best to just put up with any of their hijinks rather than try to drive them off. They tend to inhabit nicer, older houses. They're fond of playing pranks like making noise in empty rooms or unmaking the bed covers, but despite their mischief, they are not seen as evil spirits. And if they take up residence in your home, it's usually a sign of good fortune. The Scottish house elf is known as the brownie. So this is, of course, probably one of the most well-known and well-loved. And brownie is a small creature between 1 and 2 feet tall who takes up residence in a deserving family's home. The brownie resides in Scotland, but a lot of people say that the Scottish immigrants brought the brownie with them to the United States and Canada. The brownie's temperament is mild, and he is helpful with chores around the house. So when the family goes to bed, he finishes the chores. Also very helpful around the farm, bringing in food and firewood. Brownies are also said to be shapeshifters who shift into the form of a rooster to crow in the morning. But others believe that the rooster is actually a friend of the brownies and crows to tell him when to go to bed because brownies only work at night. Brownies are attracted to families who are kind and hardworking and typically take up residence in a warm nook and cranny like a cupboard or high shelf. So you can attract them to your home with offerings of bread, honey, sweet cream, cakes. Again, like the hob, like Dobby, it is said to never give clothing to a brownie because they will take it and leave. It's considered very lucky to have a brownie in your house, so you don't want them to leave. It's not just because they help with chores, but they also keep bad spirits away and bring abundance to the family. Similar to the Scottish brownie, the Irish Banty is the benevolent Irish household fairy that looks after a nice family. The main difference between brownie and Banty is said to be the gender, because Banties are generally described as being female and brownies are generally described as being male, but I have found from other practitioners that they do not always find that that is the case. But Banties are described as being small, elderly female creatures who wear tattered, old-fashioned dresses and have a wrinkly face. Her name translates to woman of the house, and obviously the name sounds familiar to Banshee. And both creatures are linked to old Irish families, but unlike the Banshee, the Banty is friendly and warm. She is a housekeeper and watches over the animals and children. She loves a warm fire, kind-hearted humans, and watches over the children at night. On the other end is the boggart, and the boggart is the bad house elf. So this is a Scottish house elf that you don't want in your home, otherwise known as the hobgoblin, goblin, boogeyman, or gob. They're similar in appearance to the brownie, however in a more distorted form, and some believe he is a brownie gone bad. So if you have a brownie in your home and you don't treat him well, he may turn into a boggart. And boggarts will eat the wood that makes up a home, like a giant termite, and destroy the foundation if it's not kicked out. Also torments the household, particularly picking on the children, like stealing food from a child's plate or even trying to smother them in the middle of the night. So this is where the image of the boogeyman originated. There are also the booboxes, and they are a Welsh cottager fairy. These are solitary fairies that live in Welsh homes. They are protective of the house, however, they don't help with chores and can become a nuisance. Since they have a mischievous nature, they tend to chase off anyone who they feel threatens the household, and that include friendly neighbors, friends, or even family members. They are depicted as tiny men who wear red hats and loincloths. So you can keep them happy by leaving offerings of food, traditionally bread, and keeping the house warm. And to distract them from running off your house guests, you can keep the milk and bread out and stoke up the fire. Next is the Monticello. House fairies, and fairies in general, are traditionally known to enjoy a good drink, particularly wine, and the Monticello is an Italian house fairy who enjoys this good drink so much that he will move into your wine cellar. He will protect your wine cellar when given his wine offerings regularly. His name means little monk because he wears a red monk's hood. The Monticello is always drunk, but typically very friendly. Folklore tells stories of the Monticello regarding a wine cellar, but also guarding a sacred treasure. If you can steal the Monticello's hood, you can take his treasure. The Cluritron is a cousin of the leprechaun in Ireland. He looks exactly like a leprechaun except for the fact that he wears red, themed color throughout all of these, and is another of these house elves. He drinks a lot of wine and lives in wine cellars. However, he is never sloppy and always well groomed. His job is to watch over the wine cellar and make sure there are no leaks or wine going bad. By giving him a bit of your wine on a regular basis, he remains happy and friendly. If you ignore him or mistreat him, he will empty your wine stock and leave the cellar in a catastrophic state. And the last on my list is the kobold, and that is the German house elf. So this is similar to the Scottish brownie again, and the kobold is a German sprite who helps with the chores. The name kobold has a few translations, the most believable being the one who rules the house. Kobolds are short, ugly beings who are depicted with large ears, hairy bodies, and large noses. They sometimes wear a cloak or dress in a suit and a large brimmed hat. Unlike brownies, kobolds love hearing thank you and receiving gifts, particularly of clothing and food. In comparison to the brownie, kobolds will turn into a mischievous, malevolent creature if he or she feels that they aren't appreciated. So those are just a few of the ones that I became familiar with through my research, but there are probably more that I missed. And it just seems like they do have a lot of things in common, and it's really going to depend on your beliefs and your heritage, what sort of traditions that you are following when figuring out maybe which ones are in your house, or if you are looking to invite one in, which one you might like to invite in. If you want to find one of these fairies in your home, the first step really that's most important is believing in them, because fairies are only going to show themselves to people who believe in them or the people who need to learn a lesson. So if you don't believe in them and have no, interest in them or have no interest in finding them in your home, they're probably never going to present themselves to you, and you are never really going to have a lot of signs or really even notice the specific signs of having a fairy if you don't believe and don't feel like you want them in. It's just going to sort of fly under the radar. So if you do believe in them and you want a fairy in your house, and I mentioned, with some of the good ones of why you would want to, and then I will get a little more into the reasons why you might want to. If that is the case, then there are some signs that are, telltale signs that you possibly already have a fairy living in your house. The first being that if you have a pet, a cat or dog, and they start acting strangely, playing with someone or something invisible, or staring up at the ceiling for no reason. If there are chores in your home that are getting done without anyone's knowledge. New types of plants and vines growing around the outside of your home. Food that goes missing without explanation, particularly sweets and milk. If you have milk or beer that goes bad before expiration dates with no explanation. If you have jewelry or sparkly items in general go missing and then turn up again in odd places or in really obvious places, like sitting just directly out on a table that you would have checked and seen that, and all of a sudden it just appears there. If members of your household have their hair braided or knotted at night in these small tiny knots, those are called fairy knots, if there's no explanation. Finding any small objects like dollhouse furniture, doll clothes, etc. around your home or around your property. Strange noises at night, like furniture being jumped on, light footsteps on stairs or in your hallways, or tapping noises in closets and on the walls. Doors opening and closing. Or if you have what seems like poltergeist activity, because that could be one of those more negative entities that I mentioned.
So those are just some of the ways, and obviously all of those things have mundane reasonings behind them. So it's not always the fae that are causing those things. It could be any number of reasons, but if you have one of those or really more than one of those, it can be a series of signs that you have a fairy already living in your home. So if you have one, but you can't find it, that is because fairies tend to be finicky and they follow their own rules. So the best thing to do is wait until the fairy is ready and willing to show themselves. Most fairies will not come out of hiding because they don't trust humans. For many years of disbelief, for many years of ancestors calling them evil, for the reasons of seeing humans damage the earth over the years, which is their sacred place, there are a lot of reasons that they do not show themselves and may never show themselves. So you won't be able to just look around and find one because they will only be found if they want to be. So you can try to coax them out by leaving an offering, particularly on one of the more active fairy days, which tend to be Beltane or Letha, and then also Samhain. There are a number of offerings that you can give. Fairy bread, cakes, cupcakes, brownies, and any other sweets are generally considered favorite fairy foods. Mead, ale, milk, and sweet cream are fairies' favorite drinks. And you can also offer things like music, poetry, art, and taking care of outdoor trash cleanup and caring for wild animals. Those are all things that would be considered offerings to the fairies. So leaving any one of those is a great way to try to coax them out and get to know whether or not they are in your home. But again, remember, it is possible that you may never actually see them. If you have tried those things, tried noticing if there's signs, tried leaving out offerings, and you're still not really getting anything, it could be that there is no fairy in your home. And there's any number of reasons for that, because there are a lot of things that people generally have in their homes that fairies really dislike and will cause them to not even move in the first place. So that can be anything particularly loud. So loud, if you have really deep sounding wind chimes or bells that are really loud, they don't like that. They do not like loud or disobedient children. Any sort of very Christian paraphernalia, so crosses and Bibles. They do not like laziness. So there are a lot of lazy people in your household. You're not going to find a fairy there. Iron is definitely something that the fae avoid. So that is iron horseshoes, skillets, tools. Generally, iron wards off the fae. So if you have a lot of iron around, they probably will not be. Bowls of salt, lots of clutter, stale air. So if you are never opening the windows in your house to get fresh air in there, if the people in your home don't really have a respect for nature, and generally if your home does not have a good amount of joy, because they are generally joyful creatures and feed off of that energy. So if your house is very depressed and solemn, unlikely to have a fairy in that environment. Things that you can have instead that fairies do like in a home are, of course, houseplants, trees, and flowers. Any sort of shrines and altars, whether that is a fairy-specific altar or just altars to deities, nature in general. If you have wine cellars, if you have clean, stocked pantries, extra cabinets and closet space for them to hide, herbs and flower gardens, people who have a general reverence and appreciation for nature, sweet, playful children, people who believe in the fae in general, which tends to be those childlike entities, but adults absolutely. Anything shiny and sparkly like jewelry and crystals, those always attract the fae, and especially if you are leaving out little trinkets for them on purpose. And they are also attracted to water. So if you have water bowls out or little fountain features, that also really attracts them into your home. So if you have them, you've done these offerings, you've gotten rid of the things that they don't like, the really only two things that are necessary for maintaining these relationships, whether that is with these traditional fae type creatures or whether that is with the ancestors in your home, whether that is invoking hearth goddesses. The really only two things you need are, first of all, offerings, feeding them in some way to feed their spirit, their energy. So any one of those offerings to sort of feed that relationship as well. And then specifically room. So ancestors like altars, but typical household fairies prefer like a closed off space. So creating some sort of room for them, leaving space in a linen closet or high up cabinet in the kitchen that's not disturbed, and just generally clearing off a shelf to have a space for them. And guardian spirits of the home tend to take up residence in, statues or other figures if they are invited in. And then, of course, there's those traditional fae like brownies and the domovoi who prefer where it's warm, so that traditional hearth. So by keeping the chimney, fireplace, the stove, oven, keeping those areas clean and uncluttered is a great way to sort of make room for them in your life. Really, it's just about nurturing and caring for that relationship like you would any other relationship with people in your life. It takes time and effort, just means putting in that regular communication and offering and just regularly acknowledging their presence. So with all of that said, I think that covers a lot of the options that you have, a lot of how to attract them and what to offer. So I am going to then switch over to answering just a couple of these specific questions that I got knowing that I have a spirit of my own in my house. So the first thing that people usually want to know is, how did it get there? Or how did it get into my house specifically? Where did it come from? How does a family have a fairy in the first place? Because a lot of older families just seem to have them. They've just always been in the house. So how did they get there in the first place? And in the folklore, it says that the oldest families in Europe where these traditions abound, so that's Scotland, Ireland, Germany, England, these families have fairies attached to them. So either the fairies guard the property or they guard the families directly. And the fae spirit tends to move with the family, or at the very least, the eldest son. They do not like to stay in empty households. There's nothing for them to do. There's nothing for them to take care of. There's no energy. There's no offerings. So if a family leaves that home, they are unlikely to stay there. They would prefer to move with the family, especially if the family has been caring for them and acknowledging their presence and generally being a good, happy family to live with. They will move whenever the family moves. So it's sad that is why a lot of them have moved over to the US and Canada, even though those traditions are based in European folklore, that a lot of them moved with the families and are still here. They really do prefer older homes, and that's a little more difficult here in the United States. We have a different idea of what old means here as opposed to what people in Europe mean. So the houses here just have a lot less history. Our house that we live in is, I think, about 110 years old at this point, and that is considered older for the city of Chicago, because there is just a lot of new construction and new homes. So the fact that our house is over 100 years old is considered one of the older ones, but by European standards, that is very, very young and not a lot of history with it. But don't fear, if you do not have an older home, you can always do the work to invite a fairy in. They like to help good, wholesome, hardworking people. So if you seek them out and you offer that to them, it is likely that you will find one that wants to move in. And as in all things in witchcraft, if you do not want to work with the fae, don't. This is absolutely optional. No house needs to have a household spirit like this. So if you are not comfortable with it and you don't want to make the offerings, don't do that. It's absolutely not necessary. If you do and you want to invite one in, all you need to do is state your intentions and your boundaries out loud. Again, this goes back to the idea of protections in general. I covered this in the Polytheism 101 episode, but you just want to be protected and not call in things if you don't know how to get rid of them. And that just goes for anything in witchcraft, is always knowing how to protect yourself. So you can put up protections in the same way and just be very clear with whatever fae spirit that you are inviting in, whether that's a brownie or any of the other ones that I listed, and let them know, here's what I'm looking for, here's what I am offering. I have boundaries of just interacting with me. If I'm in my bedroom with the door closed, that's private time, leave me alone. My husband does not want to be approached, so I'm the only one to, interact with. And you can state all of those boundaries and what you can offer in return. And there is a YouTuber, Mint Fairy, who has a great video on this. So I will link that in the show notes at witchwednesdays.com so you can check out her video on this, because she will answer much more questions and regularly works with fairies much more than I do. So she has an entire YouTube channel dedicated to it, as you can imagine, Mint Fairy. So I will be sure to link her so you can get even more of your questions answered and learn how to set those intentions and boundaries. And the main thing with that I wanted to say is don't leave offerings and start doing that if you can't do it consistently, because they come to expect it. So don't start out by inviting one in, saying that you're going to leave offerings every single day and then not being able to do that, especially, if you regularly travel and have odd work hours. If there is no rules about what kind and like how often you have to leave an offering, but just keep it consistent. So if you're saying you're going to do it once a week, do it once a week. If you're going to be out of town, let them know I'm going on vacation this week. So there will not be the traditional offering. I'm going to be back the next week though, and I will see you then. Just, keeping lines of communication open. So the other questions, of course, that I get are, where did mine come from? How did I know that it was there? And why do I like the brownie still here? So I believe, based on the, descriptors that I gave before, that it is a brownie that is here. I have never physically seen the brownie, so I gave the description of, a little bit about what each of those face spirits kind of look like, and they are all different. So you could potentially see the brownie. I have never seen it in order to distinguish it from the other types, but just based on kind of the folklore and history of brownies versus some of the other ones, it just seems like that is the spirit that is here. I could be wrong, but I have referred to it as a brownie before, and I haven't gotten any sort of negative feedback like, hey, that's not what I am. Call me this. I haven't gotten that. So I have that. I don't know if the owners that were here before us were Scottish or not. It's entirely possible that they were. There is a Scottish population here in Chicago, so entirely possible that it came with that Scottish family and they moved here. It's possible that it was in the neighborhood and this was an older home that they wanted to move into and liked the bones of the house, and they are still here. But all I know is that it came with the house. So it is not one of the ones that moved with the family and followed the eldest son and moved in with their family. It definitely came with the house. So that is another possible way to go. It doesn't always have to have been with your family for generations. So this is a, new one for us. It did not move in with myself. It was not with my husband at his house before he moved in here. It definitely was a part of this house. And the reason that we sort of figured out that it was here was the stuff going missing. That was absolutely, it started with jewelry. There has since been other things, but it started with a silver ring that I had never before misplaced, and I had in apartments before this and always knew where it was. I'm a very organized person. Maybe I will do a house tour so you can see in general, but I am a minimalist. I declutter all the time and I'm a very organized person. I do not have that many belongings, so I know exactly where each one is. Like I could make a home inventory of every single thing that I own and exactly where in this house that it is, because I am very much a minimalist. So for me to have misplaced a ring that I wore every single day and wasn't in the place that I put it, it just was not possible. It never happened before, has not happened since. It's just not what I do. So that completely went missing, and there was no other logical explanation of where it could have gone. And then one day it just turned up in some place that had already been checked, some place that it would not normally have been left. So it was an odd place. So I started getting a feeling that that was kind of odd. And then it started happening with other things, other shiny things, and namely crystals. Crystals would go missing. That happens a lot. Crystals have a mind of their own. But Fae also love crystals. So though I have the little tumbled ones, those started moving. And I was like, okay, there's got to be something here. There's some reason for it. I do have a dog, but she has never before messed with those things, has no interest in rings or crystals or anything shiny. She cares about food, and none of those things are near food. So I knew it wasn't her. So I started then looking into more about the folklore and figuring out what that could be. And I had already really known about brownies, kind of know what they did and what their purpose was. So that is really how I ended up knowing that it was here and that was the spirit that it was. And then I just started leaving out offerings, and I could just sort of feel the energy shift. And the more I sort of acknowledged that it was here and left out offerings, then stuff stopped going missing because it just wanted to, be acknowledged that it is part of the family. It's part of the house. So that is what I did. I have a little space cleared out in the
top of a kitchen cabinet that I cannot reach. And it's empty except for a little crystal in there. And then I will occasionally put the little offerings in there. And it's usually just a little dish of milk or some sort of cake type food if we're baking something. And I will leave that inside that cabinet there for a day or two, and then I will put that outside and return that to nature. My experience with the brownie has been positive, as long as, I treat it with respect and acknowledge that it is there. I do not find that the brownie for me does physical cleaning. Some people do. Some people will, walk past a mirror or window and be like, you know what, I meant to clean that last week and I totally forgot about it. And now all of a sudden it looks clean. And I know my husband didn't do it. So there are brownies out there that will physically clean. But for me, I think that our brownie cleans up energy. So its purpose and what it wants to do is bring positive energy and keep the house balanced. It likes a, quiet, relatively calm, energetically balanced home. So it brings the positive energy and it cleans up the magical energy. So rather than tidying the physical space, it is tidying the energetic space. Whatever sort of, negative energies came into the house and fell onto the floor, it sort of sweeps that all up at night. So it's a refresh in the morning, starting a new day, starting with fresh, positive energy, and generally keeping our house very balanced. And I absolutely think that it aids in that. I do a lot of other things as well with my Hearth Witchcraft and magic in general, of protecting the home, keeping it balanced, keeping the energy as a place of calm, calm in the storm. That's what I like to think of our house as. So sort of a safe haven, and there's lots of different ways that I go about that. But the brownie is also incredibly helpful in that. And just whatever sort of negativity comes in, kind of sweeps it up at night, and then it feels like totally refreshed in the morning. So for myself, that is absolutely one of the best reasons for having a fae, because that energy, you really cannot control everything that comes into your house. I wish you could, but we experience so much when we go out in the world, just dealing with other people and dealing with our environment, that stuff comes into your house. And one more layer of protection to clean up that bad energy, turn it into something positive, is great to me. That's exactly what I need in Hearth Witchcraft. That is what I'm looking for, and that's the energy that I want for my home. So having a brownie to assist with that, I think, is great. It's nice to have another spirit here. And it's very clear in reaching out of what I could offer, what I was expecting in return, having a working relationship, how often that, we interact with each other, and anything like that. It's just very open and upfront about at the beginning when we started figuring out that something was here. And I think that things have gone more smoothly since then. I like the home more since then. It's just an extra layer of magical cleanup and magical protection. Just having somebody else around. It's kind of nice and comforting. I totally understand why people don't always want to work with the fae. I haven't had any sort of, trickster issues with the brownie. I think he's pretty straightforward. He likes shiny things. I appreciate that, he likes my jewelry, but I, tell him which ones are off limits. There's some that they go missing for a couple days and then come back later. It doesn't bother me. I'm like, what, you leave my wedding ring alone. But other than that, whatever you want to do. So I know that they will turn up eventually. I have also asked the brownie for help in if I think I actually misplaced something. I don't usually, but my husband does. And I'm like, man, I cannot find the keys. Please help me. I've lost the key to the garage. Can't get in there. Please, this is rough. You have any ideas of where this might be? I would love to offer you, a dish of sweet cream or milk in exchange for the key. So those little things, like very tangible things to get help with and have just another spirit and another entity helping you. But again, if you fear them and you think it's going to be a tricky, situation, dangerous situation, then don't get into it. I don't think you should go into it with a sense of fear, just a sense of this could be helpful and a fun sort of adventure. They bring a lightheartedness to the home. It's sort of a joyful energy. So just bringing that energy levels up. and having a more joyful presence here. It's just fun. It's a fun little thing. So if you don't view it that way, then I do not recommend, trying to reach out and get a brownie. And if you have one of those more negative ones that I mentioned, it would be probably a good idea to try to get rid of that instead. So if you have any other questions about the folklore, about the brownie in particular in my house, anything, absolutely let me know. I chat over on the Discord server. That's free. Join at any time. Or you can talk to me over on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast. You can follow me over there. And if you would like to see more of my home and specifically the little brownie cupboard, then let me know. I do have a YouTube channel, again, just Witch Wednesdays. I always have that linked so you can find that, and I can do a little video there and show the little brownie spots, show the other areas in my home. Let me know. And that is everything that I have for Hearth Witchcraft, for household spirits, and everything that I have for this week. And I will see you next week. Need even more? Subscribe to Patreon and YouTube for exclusive bonus content. Order a themed witchcraft box every month through Witch Wednesdays on Etsy. Be sure to follow on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast. Find all these links and more at witchwednesdays.com.